Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the Lunch and Learn Inclusive Recruitment Processes webinar. My name is Kinga Colton, and I'm the Supervisor of Policy and Strategic Issues at the City of London. Before we get started, I want to let you know who has joined today, that we'll be recording this meeting, and a copy will be shared with you later this week or next week. The Lunch and Learn will also be aired on Rogers TV, Channel 13 at a later date, and will be posted on the City of London Get Involved page. I would like to start a meeting with a land acknowledgement. I would like to start our meeting in a good way by acknowledging the Indigenous people whose traditional territory we have gathered on today. I also encourage you to take a moment to think about the land you are situated on, and acknowledge the Indigenous people, past and present. This land was once settled by the Ottawandan. Later, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee used these lands as their traditional hunting grounds. The three long-standing Indigenous groups of this region are the Anishinaabe, including Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations; Haudenosaunee, including Mohawk, Oneida, Cayuga, Onondaga, Seneca, and Tuscarora nations; and Lenni Lenape, also referred to as Delaware and Munsee. I'd also like to recognize the three First Nation communities neighboring the City of London: Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the many long-standing treaty relationships between Indigenous nations in Canada. We recognize that all levels of government in Canada have a responsibility to honor the nation-to-nation relationship, and that individually, we all have a role to play in honoring the treaties and contributing to reconciliation. I also acknowledge my role as a settler, and that I benefit from the continuing colonization of these lands. I recognize my responsibility for reconciliation towards the First People. Welcome to this meeting, and thank you for being with us. And with that, I will now pass it to Shabara Sharma, the Chair of Priority 3 Connect and Engage Londoners, to talk about the strategy and to introduce Dharshi.
Thank you, Kinga. Welcome, everyone. Let me start by telling you something about CDIS. Created by the community through extensive engagement, London's community diversity and inclusion strategy represents a collective plan for building a more inclusive city, united with the vision that London is a diverse and inclusive community that honors, welcomes, and accepts people, all people, where people have the power to eliminate systematic oppression. CDIS is premised on the community-driven change. Volunteers in the community provide critical leadership in the development and implementation of all CDIS initiatives. It is my immense pleasure and a privilege to introduce Dharshi Lacey to you today. Dharshi has worked for over 20 years in the not-for-profit sector. She has many years of experience in inclusion and equity work. She facilitates sessions with boards and organizations to help them embed an inclusive lens in their leadership and operational work. Dharshi also leads professional development workshops on board governance for Pillar Nonprofit Network and offers consulting services to not-for-profit boards. She teaches board governance for not-for-profit management, post-degree diploma offered by Western University Continuing Studies. This work for Dharshi is a reflection of her lived experience in Canada and her passion. So now I'll pass the baton on to Dharshi. Dharshi, welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Shavita. Thanks for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. I have to say, when I sort of saw the registration list, I was both thrilled and a little overwhelmed as to the interest in this topic. So I hope I want to sort of start this by saying this is a conversation. What I am sharing in terms of this process is something that I'm personally reflecting on in terms of how we do this better, as well as how, how Pillar and the organization, as the organization I work for, is looking at doing this work a little bit better. So I'm hoping really not to talk to you. I'll go through I'll talk for about 10 or 20 minutes, hopefully, and then open it up for Q&A. and I'm not here today to talk really about the technical aspects of recruitment, but to have us together reflect on the systemic aspects of what we need to do. So by that, I mean is, what is it that we need to shift, change, or even disrupt within our organizations and our systems to really embed inclusive recruitment processes and practices? So what I'm hoping to have today is a systems change conversation as it relates to recruitment. So to get us started, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this question and post your comments in the Q&A section. So when, there's 130 of you, maybe a little less, on this call today. So when you signed up and when you're thinking about recruiting, what is your why? I want you to reflect and post, why do you want to have diversity in your workplace? Take about 30 seconds to just think about the question as to what is your why, and then if you're open to it, post it, and we can reflect on it. Thank you. So lots of comments around themes around reflecting the communities that you're trying to serve, being able to better serve communities, fair opportunity for all, to be more representative of the community you serve. So good. So you're sort of thinking about it in terms of saying that, okay, our community, there's an acknowledgement that the community has changed, and you want your organizations to reflect that. And so I think that's a really important reflection to have as to what is your why, because as you think about that and you're thinking about bringing that lens to your recruitment processes, then I would sort of suggest that if we want to hire for diversity for the reasons that you mentioned, we really need to shift the approach that we use when we recruit, right? And I think in most cases quite dramatically. So if the way we have been doing it is not getting us the results, then we need to sort of look at what is the system that kind of needs to change. So along those lines, I'm going to sort of suggest, I'm going to highlight some key points of reflection, and then open up for questions and comments. So I put this work into two broad buckets. One is in the systems change that we need in our recruitment process, and the systems change that we need to consider in the retention process in terms of being truly inclusive in our approach. So recruitment for me starts now, right? I work in the nonprofit sector. Traditionally we wait till we either have applied for a grant and got a job, got accepted, and then we post for the job, or we wait till someone has, decided to move on to another opportunity or retire, and then we post for the job. We are reactive, right? And so I would sort of suggest that why don't we start looking at it from those of us who are sitting in our organizations now and the positions that we hold, right? What do our job descriptions look like? When, in my experience, sometimes our, job descriptions are written often by the people who are doing the job currently. It tends to be written in a way, if you put a critical lens to it, by somebody who already knows the job, right? So I've often wondered, what if we took it and we sort of stripped it down to apply the lens of if somebody didn't know the job, when they read this, what would they understand about what the job entails, right? And so going with the less is more approach to look at, have we de-jargonized it, de-acronym whatever that term is, no acronyms, not just speaking specifically to the sector that we're in, but really talking specifically to the tasks at hand. And I think that if we did that, we would also be able to take that, and then when we're crafting job postings, right? Again, one of the things that happens with job postings is that we often write it for the people who already know, right? So I'm not necessarily saying I have the exact way to do it. I mean, you'd have to look at your own job postings to sort of see how you would strip it down. But I think if you start with the job description and look at how that's framed, then that will certainly help us, I think, write clearer, more concise job postings. You know, sometimes, and we're as guilty of this as other times, in our attempt to sound like a progressive, sort of funky, cool organization, we may unintentionally exclude people who may not understand the language that we're using to convey that that thought, right? So when someone is reading it without being able to hear you speak to it, then it needs to be simple and clear, right? And then, so once you have sort of your job description and your job posting, then the other question that I like to sort of pose is, who are we connected with? And even when I was preparing for this, I was wondering whether I actually put that ahead of the conversation around job postings. So as an organization, who are we already connected with, right? Is there diversity in our volunteer pools? Is there diversity amongst the clients that we serve? And of course, how diverse is your staff, right? And I'm asking this mainly because, in my opinion, I think it's not just to know where to post or who to send your job postings to, but it's actually to know, to build your credibility as an organization that you're welcoming and inclusive. So the more diverse everybody who touches your organization is, the more the messaging is, right? I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone in pre-COVID times into different workplaces, and just by being able to look around the room, and as a racialized woman, obviously I look to see what kind of diversity is in the room, and walk away thinking, that'll be a nice place to work, right? And so building those kinds of connections, I think, is really important. So your recruitment process doesn't really start with the job, but it starts with everything that we do, everybody that we touch, right? Because if you, and then the other piece that I really want to do is to give a shout out to the community organizations, even like for us in London, who work with people who are seeking employment, right? And how do we build the connections with them so that they understand when we post a job, what it entails? So this is not just about who's the contact person over there that I can sort of send an email with the job posting, but who is somebody there that maybe I can develop a relationship to talk about the type of job, so that they would also be filtering to find skilled candidates from the people that they are working with, trying to get them engaged in the labor force. Okay, so job postings, job descriptions, job postings, building our network so that we are connected to the people that we're trying to reach. And then sort of let's look at the practical applications of, you posted for a resume, posted for a position, now you've got a whole bunch of resumes and you're reviewing them for to shortlist, right? And there's lots of reading out there in terms of how do you de-bias the screening process. I would argue that if you're looking for diversity, then the things that might give that away in terms of names and where people have received their education would be a way to screen in rather than screen out, right? The more global the experience is, I think, the more likely it is that you will get an exciting new candidate. And often we screen, right from the beginning, I think in the resume process, we're screening for what we're seeing as a fit. And I would really ask us to challenge what we mean by fit, because I think that when you're screening for fit, you're often screening for sameness. You're screening to replace yourselves. So I was talking to some colleagues about this session yesterday, and we were talking about, screen for culture add, not for culture fit. And that might be a way to look at their resumes differently. When you've shortlisted, look at your shortlist and see how diverse it is. Are you getting a sense that there's a sameness to everybody that you have shortlisted? Or is there some exciting resumes in there that may not speak very specifically to the job itself, but may bring a lens that you haven't thought of, right? So look at it from a bold perspective. And then once you've done that, there is the dreaded interview process. And is there anything that is more prone to imbalance of power than the interview process? I don't really think so. We don't give people jobs, right? That's not the way I would suggest we approach this process. That is a mindset that we need to shift, right? How do we decolonize the way we have been doing things to make it a safe and comfortable process for both the candidates and the people who are doing the interviewing, so that we both bring our best selves to the process, right? And again, reinforcing, looking for culture add, not for culture fit. So some of the things, again, is like, what are the questions that you're asking? And for every question, I think, that you craft, you need to say, what is the answer I'm looking for? And then if you don't get that answer, ask yourself, is that my bias? Or was that answer just great? It was just not the answer I was looking for, right? So be a little bit critical in terms of why you're asking the question. And then if you get it differently, whether the question was still answered or not, right? I think sometimes in our attempts to be really objective and neutral, we again create a playing field that only people who already know the rules can succeed in, right? The system, the system works for the people it has been built for. So the interview process has been, I feel sometimes that in my 20+ year career has not changed that much. And then when you look at who we recruit, we often recruit for sameness, right? So we have to change the system of how we do the recruiting if we want to actually achieve different results. So that's the front end process. I want to spend a few minutes talking about retention. So going back to the opening question, are you ready for the change that you're seeking? I would sort of say again, before you even recruit, is it very clear and deeply embedded within your organization, your staff, your board, that there is a commitment for recruiting for diversity, right? Does everybody know that and understand that? Where is it written? Is it embedded in our strategic plans? Is it embedded in our project plans? Where it has to be, where is it threaded through the organization that this is something that is a corporate organizational value? And then when was the last time we dusted off and reviewed, our harassment and discrimination policies? And I'm sort of saying this is because we want to look at them not from just a process that says thou shalt not discriminate or harass. It's also looking at the process and reviewing the process of how, when something does happen, what is the process to address issues, and making sure that everybody is clear and refreshed on that, right? And then in terms of, other things that you have, that you may or may not have considered, right? Do you have a prayer room? Do you have policies in place to facilitate or encourage the celebration or the observation of non-Christian holidays? Because Christian holidays are celebrated most with stats already, but not the others are not. So how do you allow for people to do that? Right? Any other policies that you have or need to build in terms of other non-visible needs that people might have would also be important. Right? And all of these things, I'm just asking that we reflect, and then it's part of what we offer to candidates. So we don't wait for somebody to ask that for something that a need that needs to be fulfilled, we make it an offer. It's part of the entire process. It could even be part of the interview process, right? So these are the key points that I wanted to, because it's 12:25 and I know we have about 15, 20 minutes for questions. So look at our job descriptions, look at how we write our job postings, start building our networks through every point of contact with our organizations. Challenge ourselves with the resume review process and the interview prep, and certainly what we're doing to make sure that once we do hire, people are welcomed, included, and feel a sense of belonging. So I can honestly say from my own experience that if you have hired me to join your organization to do the things the way you have always done them, then the value of difference that I could bring will be lost, right? So the whole point of having organizations that reflect the communities that you're serving is that you can have within your organization that perspective that can make what you offer that much stronger. So if you hire for sameness, or you hire with diversity, but then you want sameness within your workplace, you are likely, number one, I would say, may not retain that person. And number two, we're not going to get the benefit that we're saying we want in that recruitment, right? So, this work, I know there are some of you on this call who I work with, as well as I know quite well. And so you've heard me say this before, if this work was easy, it would be done. I don't think there's any single bigger investment that an organization has than in the investment in hiring. So, trying to do it in a hurry will never work if you're trying to embed inclusion in your process. So with those words, I am going to stop talking and open it up for questions. And Kinga, are you helping me with that, or should I just go in and have a look?
I am helping. So folks, the chat is disabled, so make sure you use the Q&A feature to type in your questions, and then we will be answering the more general questions, but if you do have a direct question, feel free to send it my way, and then I can share it with Dharshi after the session. So I did see a question a little earlier. So it is, what if the job is a national posting? How do you make these personal connections?
Oh, wow. That is a really good question. So obviously, if it's a national posting, you can't make those personal connections. What is the opportunity you might present for somebody to be able to reach out to ask more questions about the posting? So again, I'm sort of going with the fact that my premise is you have to create the luxury of time. But is there, we will talk with, when organizations put out a request for proposal for a consultant or whatever, you often say, if you have any questions, send it to us, and then we will reply blanketly to everybody who's submitted an RFP. So I just wonder, with something that's national in scope, whether you would create opportunity for people to pose some clarification questions that might help them make a decision. And that offer itself might sort of lend itself to saying that you're interested in that, in an inclusive approach. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that would probably be the way I would go.
Awesome. So next one is, how do you help hiring managers be aware of their potential bias?
How do you help hiring managers? Yeah. So I think that's what I'm kind of speaking to. I think that, the recruitment starts now. So rather than, so these are conversations that managers need to be having even before you're considering posting for a position. So what is your common understanding of what it means not to hire for bias, right? Or, unconscious bias is one of those things that, one does have, but then how do you challenge yourself that maybe bias is in play? So there is no easy answer. This is sort of a process of unlearning the way we've been doing things to do something differently. So that's probably why I also suggest that you really take a good hard look at the questions that you're developing for the job that you're posting for, so that you have a real clear sense as to what it is you're looking for. Thank you.
All right, so next question. What if you want to encourage more inclusive recruitment and hiring when you aren't in a decision-making position or in an HR department?
When you're in or not?
When you are not.
When you're
How
not.
do you encourage it?
I'm just smiling, not for any other reason, but I'm sort of thinking, what would I do if I had to push that forward? I would talk to my colleagues and sort of try and get some other folks to buy into the idea and then present it as a proposal to senior managers and decision makers. I'm struggling with this a little bit because I find it difficult that senior managers and decision makers do not see this as something that is an business imperative. So if they needed to be reminded, perhaps you could gather some other people within your own structure to push that idea forward.
All right, so next question. Can you talk more about what is necessary for some is good for all as it relates to how you move away from the conversation around accommodations versus inclusivity and equity?
Necessary for some is?
Necessary for some is good for all.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, how do you embed it from the get-go?
Yeah. And I think this is the, I'm trying to see how to frame this. If you look at it as a deficit that you're trying to address, then it's not inclusive, right? Why would you not, as an organization, be accessible in terms of recognizing people different needs in terms of accessibility, right? And in terms of belonging. So so I guess my point is that yes, and everybody will benefit, obviously, from that. I'm struggling with this answer a little bit. I apologize. I'm trying to sort of see how to frame it. So my first point is that building your organization for equity will benefit everybody. There is sort of, that's just the premise that I make. Looking at it as as a barrier or a challenge to your organization is not the approach to take, right? It's the approach to take is take a look at your organization in all of its aspects and say, who is really comfortable here and who might not be? And let's build it for comfort and belonging for everybody.
All right, thank you, Dharshi. Next is, can you suggest some resources to further explore changes and differences for interview preparation?
Yeah, certainly pull some stuff and maybe send it back out through you, Kinga. More and more what I'm reading is around what I'm speaking to here a little bit is about how do you shift the frame of how you're doing it, right? And so, but there are some articles that come to mind that I will maybe share with Kinga, and she can share it out with the folks who attended, who are in attendance today.
Awesome, for sure. I'll send those out to folks. So if you have an existing posting and the candidate pool you get is relatively homogeneous, what would that be a strong indicator that your posting job description requires revision?
Yes. That's the short answer. It also might, and the other question I would ask is, where did it go, right? Who have you talked to? Who have you shared it with? Who have you talked to about it? I think we sometimes use, like even with us, sometimes we have a list of places that we send our postings to, but we haven't really talked to anybody about what the job is. So if your candidate pool is completely homogeneous, then it indicates that it hasn't had a wide reach, and or people have read it and not felt like it's a fit for them.
All right, so next question is, how do you keep technical questions about skills that one must have for the job bias-free and as inclusive as possible?
So if there are, recently with a colleague, we did some interviews where we actually gave real life examples of what the job would entail and gave people some time to think about it and respond to it. So it's somewhat like a situational interview, but make it as sincere and authentic as possible in terms of what it is that you're actually expecting somebody to do. So, like the questions that I, rather than say, what would you do if you had a difficult client, I would suggest that you would use an example of a real issue that comes up, and give someone some time to reflect and respond to that question. So that they actually, they're not trying to guess at what you're trying to ask, but they know that this is something that does happen in the workplace.
Thank you, Dharshi. All right, so next is, how can you best hire diverse candidates and highlight their needs without creating any resentment from current employees within the organization?
Highlight their needs without raising it within the organization. So I think it speaks a little bit to my point earlier around what are the systems that you have in place for diversity, and then you offer that to the candidates. So I'm not, maybe you might want to elaborate a little bit. I'm wondering whether you're asking about religious accommodation. I'm not sure if that's the question I might need a little bit of clarification as to what you mean, an example.
All right, I will keep an eye out for that. The next question in our Q&A is, What are your suggestions to building trust with diverse communities?
My suggestion is that you engage with the intentionality to take the time that it takes, right? So for me, it would be try and reach out. You may not get the response you're looking for right away, and you reach out again and again and again, and you're willing to maintain the relationship. When I think of some of the work that we've done at Pillar, some of the success we've had took 3 years, and we're still sort of developing and maintaining the relationship. So, we sometimes reach out to people when we are writing a proposal. We reach out to people when we're doing a focus group. So it's very transactional often, and we need it to be transformational. So it needs to be authentic. Indigenous communities have told us frequently that it took 7 generations for us to build, create this colonized system. It's going to take almost as many to deconstruct it. So so don't go when you have a need. Go with what you can offer the community that you're trying to make relationship with. What is it that you have to give?
All right, thanks, Dharshi. Next question. What is the role that mentorship can play in fostering inclusive recruitment?
I love mentorship. Mentorship is one of those things that I think works for everybody who joins a new organization as they're trying to learn the culture of the organization and how things are done. So I would certainly say if you're developing a mentorship program, you have it across the board, not just for your diverse candidate recruitment. Yeah, so I think mentorship is key. I think it's a great way to have someone who, as a go-to person, to kind of deconstruct a team meeting, a staff meeting, something that came by email that would feel safe to ask. I think it's, I think even just as an onboarding process, I think it's critical for whoever might be providing some oversight to that role to build in regular check-ins in at least the first quarter of that process. And by regular, I mean weekly or bi-weekly, just so that somebody knows that there's some dedicated time to ask the questions that they need to ask. And again, it's that sense of active offer. What are we doing to bring somebody in and keep them engaged and feeling like they belong to the organization, rather than, what we classically do is, my door is always open. Please let me know if you have anything that you need. I'll be happy to respond, but sort of creating some systemic pieces that there are some genuine points of contact.
All right, next question. How do we hire in a diverse and inclusive manner when most recruitment efforts are internal and unionized?
Well, that's this big systems piece, isn't it? So I honestly have not worked in a unionized environment, so I think that would sort of be more in terms of how do you make that decision within the organization that says that you are going to be making that shift in recruitment. And then how do you negotiate with the union to make that happen? I know that's come up. I remember it came up last summer with school boards, where because of that process, that there wasn't a lot of diversity in amongst the teaching staff, and so that is a deep systemic piece that needs to be addressed. and not being used as an excuse for not doing it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So we do have a follow-up to the question that you asked. So specifically in terms of reactions to current employees who are aware diversity is a priority now and may blame a lack of success in their application to this campaign.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is the tough, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think that is the tough conversation. And even when we do through impact consulting, when we're talking about this topic, this is where sometimes it stops in its tracks. When you tell, if you're recruiting for diversity, you want the skills that you want because you have no intention to tokenize in your hiring. But if all things are equal, then you will go with your diversity candidate. So it is a tough conversation to have. But if you've made that commitment, that really is something that will need to be articulated. And that is my point earlier too, in terms of retention, right? So you want to make sure that everybody knows that this is an organizational commitment, because you don't want that discomfort and that tension when somebody is hired. So if it's a non-negotiable, it needs to be articulated that way.
All right, so we're at 12:45. We're going 12:46 actually. We're going to do two last questions. So you mentioned that the interview process hasn't been revamped in quite some time and that it highlights power dynamics. Can you elaborate on that? Also, what can an organization do to have a more inclusive interview process?
Yeah, so I mean, we have been experimenting here with some success, I think, in terms of providing, at least for the first interview, providing the interview questions to the candidates so that they have some time to pause, to reflect and prepare a little bit better when they come to the interview, or at least consider some of them, because it does two things. I mean, one is it does help to have them ahead of time so you can prepare, but it also messages that you're really trying to get the best out of that interview. So that's sort of one suggestion that I would sort of make. I mean, there are the things that I'm sure most of you are doing, letting people know how many people are going to be in the room when you're doing the interview, that sort of thing, so they're mentally prepared. I remember a decade or more ago in a previous job, going to an interview where there were 9 people in the room. I had no idea. And that was really, like, in terms of trying to maintain eye contact with questions being asked. Explaining the process, if you're going to take turns asking questions, those are sort of obvious things, I think. But maybe the offering the questions ahead of time, and then I think in your debrief after is to sort of challenge each other in terms of the responses you heard, and if they were not what you were expecting to hear, is that a problem or not for you? Right, so checking your own bias in terms of the response.
All right. So next, can you please expand on culture add and culture fit? How can you avoid culture fit?
Well, if you see yourself, yeah, this is culture fit is when for me, it's sort of that sense of, oh, I can go hang out with this person, right? It feels really comfortable. It feels that it would take no effort at all for you to engage with that person, right? And by that, so I would ask you to challenge whether you're sort of hiring for sameness, like so hiring for somebody who is just more or less like everybody else in terms of, sense of humor, maybe, just style, those kinds of things. Culture add is sort of saying, sometimes I've been in interviews when I think, this would be a unique perspective to have within our organization. It's not always going to be easy, but it might be someone who will challenge us to think differently. So that's what I mean by the culture add, is that you're not looking. So to that point, if you're asking your interview questions and you're getting all the answers that you're really expecting to get, that would be culture fit. And I would challenge us to sort of say that went a little too smoothly compared to something else that might have felt a little bit more, responses that may have felt a little bit more disruptive.
All right, thank you, Dharshi. So we're at 12:50. Do you feel like we can do one more question, or would you like to wrap it up?
I'm good to do one more question.
All right, so our final question. I'm interested in learning about forums to promote employment opportunities outside of the traditional sites like Indeed, Charity Village, etc. That might increase or promote diverse applicants.
Yeah, so I think for me, and this is my personal experience, is when I have reached out to colleagues in the sector who are working to help people find employment. So I think of Will Employment Connections, Pathways, Employment Help Center, and I do apologize if I haven't, Fanshawe College. I would reach out and develop some relationships there because they are probably seeing the candidates that you're trying to hire. And I remember going one time with a previous job, and I went and spoke to somebody and said, this job is sort of different because it doesn't lend itself, it's not a straight up like that I'm looking for an accountant. I'm looking for a community developer who is also doing, who will be doing these aspects of work. And in having that conversation, they were able to direct some candidates to us, many of whom we did hire at the time, because they were able to see that lens. So this is the investment of time in relationships, I think, that needs to be made when you're looking to hire for equity and inclusion.
All right, thank you, Dharshi, and thank you everyone for submitting your questions. If I did not get to your question and you would like it answered, please feel free to send it to me through email and I will forward it to Dharshi. And as I stated before, if there's more direct or specific questions, also please feel free to send them my way. But I will now pass it off to Shabara to do our closing remarks.
Thank you, Kinga. And thank you, Dharshi, for shining a spotlight on just how important it is for organizations to communicate their commitment to inclusion and diversity right from the recruitment process and onwards. This was a wonderful presentation. And thank you to all of our attendees today as well. And thank you for the fantastic engagement throughout the webinar. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and the Lunch and Learn. As Kinga mentioned earlier, a copy of the Lunch and Learn will be shared with you at a later date. Also, this presentation will be aired on Rogers TV, Cable 13 at a later date as well. We'll be posting it on the city's website under the Get Involved page. If you want to learn more about CDIS or Pillar, we encourage you to visit us online. The links are actually now on or in the chat. Also, just a reminder, you will be redirected to a feedback survey right after the session ends. So please take a few moments to fill the survey out to let us know how we did and so that we can plan our future webinars for you. Thank you so much once again for joining us today. The next Lunch and Learn will happen in May and we hope to see you there. Thank you.